They found Beowulf at dawn, curled in the lee of a wind-whipped wall, where the moor's grasses bent like a slow, tired sea. The sky had the bruised blue of a morning that had not slept, and when the villagers pushed through the gate, they spoke in the low, careful voices people use in churches and hospital corridors, voices that wanted to be gentle, but couldn't quite stop themselves from breaking. Beowulf was not a wolf at all. He had been a dog, a great, shaggy, brindled animal with the size of a small pony and the eyes of someone who had seen too much and still wanted to trust. He'd arrived in the village months ago, a creature half myth, half miracle, at once the answer to a boy's prayer and the problem no one expected. Children named him Bear. Adolescents gave him wolfish nicknames. Older folks called him by the single, steady thing he offered, loyalty. For weeks he'd been a living joke and a wagging blessing, a dog who took up more space than the Woolpack's pub dog and who made the Dales feel more like itself. When the search parties went out the previous night, they had scattered like dandelion fluff across the moor, torches bobbing, coats zipped up against the harm of wind. Tom, Beowulf Hargreaves, the man, not the dog, had vanished the night the river rose and swallowed the lane. He had been a bright, complicated character, a builder who wore his grief like a second shirt, quiet in public and reckless in private, loved by some, exasperating to others. His laugh lingered in the Woolpack rafters, and his hands smelled of timber and tea. He'd had a history no one could quite reduce to a single explanation. A dead father, a sister who drifted in and out of contact, a man whose kindness sometimes ran into cliffs. They found Bear the dog first, by the old sheepfold. He was shivering, one ear nicked, nose streaked with earth, hair matted with peat. He nosed at the gate as if to say, "Come on, we've been waiting." But beside him, half buried in the loam and trampled by reeds, was the thing that made the village press itself into small, trembling knots of grief. Tom, his coat pulled about him like a thin coffin, face pale as something picked clean by winter. It ought to have been impossible. Tom had been too stubborn a man for the moors to have simply taken him. He carried a holdfast about him, a way of latching on that refused surrender. And yet there he was, eyes closed, mouth slack in the manner of a man who had run a long way and simply stopped. In his hand was a small, battered notebook, the kind with a spiral spine, and a pencil snapped in two like a matchstick. Bear, faithful to the end, lay with his nose tucked under Tom's shoulder, as if guarding the last breath. The first who saw them was Wendy, who had set out with a thermos and a torch, and a heart full of the kind of optimism that only gets quieter as people grow older. She found them, and then, like a struck bell, the rest gathered. They called the ambulance. They made the calls you have to make when lives shift from being what they were to being what they had been. The news spread like a cut through the town's skin. By 8 o'clock, the Woolpack had filled with faces that reflected the sky outside, gray and raw. Chaz pressed his fist to her mouth until the knuckles went white. Kane's jaw worked, a stone grinding against stone. Belle sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a cup that steamed like a small, humble offering. Patty lit a cigarette and then crushed it out in the ashtray as if to deny the habit. Sam put his arm around a boy who didn't understand what permanent looked like. Everyone had a version of Tom in their pocket. To some, he was the man who'd fixed their fence without so much as a thank you. To others, he was the one who played with Bam Bam in the yard and let the kids run his tools like treasure. To a handful, he was forever the man who walked out of a door and didn't come back the same. Memory made him many small things, and each memory fit together like miscut tiles. The coroner came, the soft officiality of gloves and measured questions, and the rumor mill began to churn. There would be talk of exposure, of a fall. There would be professional language, unexpected death, softened by hands on shoulders. But the real talk, the ache that had no need for officialese, was not in the particulars. It was in the way people said his name and felt it resist. At the heart of it was the notebook. Tom's little spiral-bound ledger was creased and damp, and when the police opened it in the Woolpack backroom, they passed the pages like a relic. It was full of lists and sketches and the kind of small notations only someone paying attention to small things keeps. There were measurements: oak post, 2.1 meter, and a doodle of a dog that looked suspiciously like bear. There were places in the margins where Tom had written single words: call, mum, keep. And then deeper among the pages, a letter half torn from its edge, the ink running like memory into water. The letter was addressed to M. It spoke of failing eyes and of a father whose shadow had been long and disorienting. It spoke of a debt not of money, but of legacy, a line of men in Hargreaves who built barns and boundaries and bore the things people hoped to forget. "I am not my father," Tom had written, in a hand that looked tired of proving itself. "I have done things that cost me sleep. I have tried to be better. Tell Mum I'm sorry. I am not enough." Reading that small confession made people's mouths go dry. The village has a way of loving the people who are most like itself, flawed, stubborn, trying. Once the word spread, the flavor of regret changed everything. Neighbors who once argued over a hedgerow found their voices soft as moth wings, full of apologies they didn't know they were holding. Belle thought of the times Tom had helped her with the allotment fences, how his hands had steadied the wood like he understood what needed holding. She thought of the way he had listened when she spoke of the future in odd, hopeful sentences. Sometimes she had thought of